Hello, everyone. Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Sean Thistle. I use she, her pronouns, and I'll be offering our land acknowledgement and a brief introduction to our wonderful MC, Ezra McKay, today. In my role as Director of Philanthropy, I get to invite generosity to 34 programs and services that stretch throughout Treaty 7 territory, and at the same time, I get to work with some truly remarkable individuals who you will get to meet today. Trellis's commitment to reconciliation starts with acknowledging the land we get to inhabit. We acknowledge the traditional and ancestral territory and oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika Nation, the North and South Piikani Nations, the Kainai Nation, and we also acknowledge the other members of Treaty 7 First Nations, the Tsuut'ina, Yarhe Nakota or Stoney Nakota, which includes Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. And in addition, the city of Calgary is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta in Region 3. And finally, we acknowledge all nations, genders, and spirits who live, work, and play in Mohkinstsis, the Blackfoot name for Calgary and Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta, who help us steward this land, honor, and celebrate this territory. It is my privilege to welcome you to this afternoon's gathering in honor of Trans Day of Remembrance. I've personally been queer since 1975, and standing up for 2S LGBTQ rights has grounded, humbled, and inspired me throughout my lifetime. And this has been particularly true in times of loss and in the growing resilience of young, trans, and non-binary voices with the courage to take up space. Trellis has hosted Trans Day of Remembrance gatherings for a few years now, but this year we wanted to welcome others to join us. In today's conversation, I hope you find learning, solace, connection, and even hope. Thanks to the talents of my colleague Blake, we got creative with our broadcasting setup today, and as a result, you can expect a space that is kind, simple, and welcoming to our speakers. Your time is precious, as is the chance to share space even virtually, so thank you so much for joining us. In addition, today's sharing will be undoubtedly beautiful, raw, real, and vulnerable. Please take time for yourself as you need. Get a glass of water, stretch, close your eyes when you need to, check in with a friend. And additional resources are both in the event description as well as in the chat today. And we will be guided today by Ezra McKay and joined by other Trellis colleagues and youth who will courageously share parts of their stories with us. Before I introduce Ezra, I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to our friends at ConocoPhillips who welcomed us into their diversity, equity, and inclusion learning journey earlier this summer, and who gifted us with the resources to pay honorariums to all of our speakers today. Thank you very much, ConocoPhillips Canada. So Ezra has been with Trellis for 7 years and is an integral member of our team of Circle Keepers. Ezra provides support for individuals and Indigenous system navigation, connecting folks to internal and external resources that include elders, ceremonies, and medicines. Ezra has been in the helping field for more than 2 decades. They have their master's degree in social work. They have 2 dogs and 2 cats, and they are the oldest of 7 children. And with that, I am honored to pass the proverbial microphone. Ezra, thank you in advance for the care with which you have invited us all into space today.
Hello, everybody. Hello, friends, family, people from Mohkinstsis, people from Canada. I just want to welcome you to our 3rd annual Trans Day of Remembrance. Sean forgot to mention I'm also a parent to 2 daughters, and I'm a grandson to 1, but that's okay. I don't know if I told her that last time, but I know some of them are watching, so I wanted to make sure that they are part of this. I just want to welcome everybody to the 3rd annual Trans Day of Remembrance with Trellis. I'll be your host, Ezra McKay. My pronouns are they, them. So Trans Day of Remembrance started in 1999 by Gwendolyn Ann Smith when she had lost her friend Rita Hester, who was an African-American trans woman. Rita had been murdered, and there was a lot of stuff going on in the United States where it was quite upsetting, and it kind of brought to the forefront of what was happening to transgender people. So every year it's been happening since then. I've personally been part of Trans Day of Remembrance for well over a decade, not necessarily here in Calgary, but within Canada. So every year it normally happens November 20th, which is tomorrow. We decided to do it today, and we wanted to demonstrate the importance to honor those that we have lost through the continued violence towards transgender people around the world, trans people that are part of the BIPOC community, and for those that may not know what BIPOC is, it means Black, Indigenous, people of color, which includes our Indigenous people, our fellow Two-Spirit siblings that are at an increased risk of violence. So currently, right now, here in Canada, Ontario is the only province that has put into law that Trans Day of Remembrance is to be honored every year. It started back in 2017. Hopefully other provinces will start to do that as well. I also wanted to mention the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people. So they had completed an inquiry a few years ago, and within the documentation includes the impact of colonization that it's had on our 2S LGBTQIA. I know that's a really long acronym. This inquiry captured the stories of violence that led to many murders among our people. The calls for justice applies to all of us. We all have a duty to respond and act accordingly, including the calls for justice for all Canadians, child welfare, service providers, and others to read and start to take action so that we can provide a safe and accountable space for all. It's quite easy to look up the calls to justice. You can simply just Google it if you're not sure about it. And before we get started, I just wanted to include some definitions, just because it might be my everyday existence, but I do understand that not everybody may understand some of the terminology. So I'll start with Two-Spirit. So Two-Spirit refers to a person who identifies as having both a masculine and a feminine spirit, and is used by some Indigenous people to describe their sexual, gender, and or spiritual identity. Transgender is a person whose gender identity or gender expression differs from the sex or gender that they were assigned at birth. Non-binary, which is actually how I identify, as well as Two-Spirit, is used to describe people who feel that their gender cannot be defined within the margins of the gender binary. Many of us understand that gender goes beyond identifying as either a man or a woman. Next, we have gender nonconforming, which is a term given to people who don't conform with the gender norms that are expected of them. Gender binary was created by current colonial systems in which people are typically given 2 options to either identify as male or female. However, I do want to note that there has been a shift with some of the systems within Canada. So with our passport, with birth certificates, with driver's licenses, it does give us the option to either identify as male, female, or another gender. However, that doesn't streamline to all of the systems, including the healthcare system, where a lot of us have to deal with discrimination on a daily basis. Next, we have cisgender, which is the gender that people were given at birth, in which they most identify with. Cisnormative is the assumption that cisgender is the norm and privileges this over any other form of gender identity. And transphobia is the fear, hatred, disbelief, or mistrust of people who are transgender, thought to be transgender, or whose gender expression doesn't conform to traditional gender roles. Transphobia can prevent transgender and gender nonconforming people from living full lives free from harm. So to talk more about the transphobia that we experience, according to Global Trans Perspectives on Health and Wellbeing, so it's part of the Trans Respect versus Transphobia Community Report. I'll just take a nice breath. Woo, it's a lot. Discrimination and violence against trans people are aggravated by structural factors such as early family rejection, school dropout, due to bullying, harassment, and violence. However, the root contributing factor is the cisnormative, heteronormative, gender binary setup of the school system in many countries. For many trans people who don't have access to education, sex work tends to be the only way to make a living due to the lack of mechanisms and information to demand access to education, employment, and healthcare. So I also wanted to offer a trigger warning because I'm going to next provide some stats on murdered trans people for 2021. So I'll just give people a moment in case they don't want to hear this part. So as of 2021, 375 trans and gender diverse people have been murdered. That's a 7% increase from 2020 and a 6% increase from the year before. Cases from Greece, Kazakhstan, and Malawi were reported for the first time. 96% of those murdered globally were trans women or trans feminine people. 58% of murdered trans people whose occupation is known were sex workers. Murders of trans people in the United States have doubled from last year. Many people of color make up 89% of those murders. 43% of the trans people murdered in Europe were migrants. 70% of all murders registered happened in Central and South America, 33% of them in Brazil. 36% of the murders took place on the street and 24% in their own residence. The average age of those murdered is 30 years old, the youngest being 13, the oldest being 68. According to this website, there were no reported murders here in Canada. However, that's not to say it's not happening. Also, since the pandemic started, it's been no secret that we've lost many people within this country from the ongoing opioid crisis. Our trans relatives are also dying as a result. And according to this, I would also like to take a moment of silence to honor those that we've lost. So we'll take about a minute. Thank you, everybody. Next, I would like to show a video on Bill C-16 regarding gender rights. Thank you.
The federal government of Canada recently passed Bill C-16, which includes gender identity and gender expression in our Human Rights Act. But what does Bill C-16 mean for folks living in Canada? C-16 amends the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code to include gender identity and gender expression as grounds protected from discrimination, in the same way they protect grounds like race, religion, age, and sexual orientation. Now this may have you asking, what exactly are gender identity and gender expression, and why do they need to be protected? We all have a gender identity, that internal experience of being a man, woman, both, or neither. And all people express gender in unique ways, through their clothing, hairstyle, voice, and behavior. When a baby is born, people are quick to ask, is it a boy or a girl? But it's not always that simple. As we grow, Some people realize they don't identify fully, or in part, with what people expect about the sex assigned to them at birth. And for some, this might mean they identify as transgender or trans. This is the T that you might recognize from the acronym LGBTQ. And trans can be an umbrella term, used to represent a wide range of identities and experiences. And though there is more public awareness and visibility of trans lives than ever before, data reveals distressing levels of anti-trans discrimination, harassment, and violence. In an Ontario survey of trans people, 18% were turned down for a job, 20% were physically or sexually assaulted, and 34% were verbally threatened or harassed, all because of their gender identity. So Bill C-16 protects us from being discriminated against because of how we identify or express our gender in areas like immigration, criminal law, federal services, and the census. It also makes spreading hate propaganda based on gender identity and gender expression a criminal offense, which helps protect our trans and gender diverse communities. And while achievements at the federal level are important advancements for human rights, similar protections are lacking across Canada's provinces and territories. Despite Bill C-16, some provinces and territories are still in the process of amending their human rights protections to include gender identity and gender expression. And not all provinces and territories explicitly protect gender expression. And this leaves serious gaps for discrimination on these grounds in the healthcare, education, and justice systems, because these systems are governed by provincial and territorial human rights law. So Bill C-16 is not enough. Provinces and territories must measure up to the federal government's action. Make gender identity and gender expression protected grounds throughout Canada.
The truth is that Hollywood's elite actors can get ripped.
Thank you for watching the video, and I hope you learned something about Bill C-16. So instead of hearing me talk the whole time, I am excited to introduce our first presenter. So we have Raven. Their pronouns are she and they. Raven's ancestral lands are Siksika. Raven identifies as two-spirit trans, and in her spare time, they enjoy drawing, listening to music, or YouTube while drawing and gaming. What she will be presenting is a picture, and I'm also happy to introduce my coworker Alyssa, who will be with Raven. Alyssa's pronouns are she and her. Thank you.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
You're good.
Hi everyone. So like Ezra mentioned, my name is Alyssa, and beside me I have Raven, and she's brought a piece of her art. So she's provided a written statement, so I'm just going to read it out for her. Along my journey of reconnection, I see the value of my strife. I see the path and meaning of what it means to be two-spirit, the duty I have to the two-spirit ancestors before me. I suffer as they did when colonialism and assimilation took hold of this land and nearly wiped out the legacy of their sacrifice. They called us immoral and evil, abominations, unnatural and sick, when in truth, a truth beyond their comprehension, we are sacred and have a right to exist. As a two-spirit woman, I exist in defiance of the hate this world bleeds upon me and my relations who identify and proudly identify as two-spirit. We are always here, and we will continue on as we did for millennia. I'm afraid, but that fear is what makes this worth it. I'm not the first, and I'm not the last. Existence is how I fight, and I fight for those behind me who are still afraid to be who the Creator blessed them to be. So thank you, Raven, for joining us today, and thank you for providing your statement and your artwork.
Thank you, Raven and Alyssa. That was wonderful. Our next presenter is Sebastian. Their pronouns are they, them. They're a visitor to Treaty 7. Sebastian's ancestral roots come from Portugal and Cree from Ontario. Sebastian identifies as non-binary, and in their spare time they enjoy puzzles, finding underground music artists, listening to music, playing the guitar and ukulele, going to vinyl record shops, and taking care of their plant babies. Sebastian will be sharing some storytelling. Thank you.
Oh, that's creepy. Okay. Do I just go? Okay. Hello, my name is Sebastian and I identify as non-binary. My pronouns are they, them. Just a quick trigger warning before getting into my story. There is mention of suicide and extreme bullying. Yeah. So how do we get here? Well, it started back when I was approximately 6. I had no idea about anything LGBTQ+, let alone that sometimes people's gender identity didn't align with the biological one given at birth. Something in my soul felt off, as though a piece wasn't designed for the spot it'd been placed in. In this case, I'd later figure out it was 2 things. 1, my gender identity didn't align with the one that I was given at birth, and 2, my love knows no boundaries, for all that matters is one soul. Of course, being raised, going to church, Catholic school, from a Roman Catholic Portuguese family that has literal nuns in it to this day, I knew nothing of why I felt like a piece of me was being jammed somewhere it didn't belong. So it wasn't until I hit 8 years of life that I told my pretty radical mom something about me didn't feel right. First, I spoke of how the other female-presenting individuals in my grade were busy having crushes on boys while I was busy having crushes on them. This is the age I found out about the LGBTQ+ community. My mom, who was the OG black sheep of our family, had loads of information on the community and connections. Through these connections, I was introduced to the community. At 8 was when I went to my first Pride event in Calgary, and from there I started attending events everywhere, even Vancouver's Pride Parade, which I highly recommend going to. It's very fun. However, even though my mom was super welcoming about it, I had no idea how dark and cruel this world could get exactly. I had my fair share of life events up to that point, like growing up in a severely poor family, living in Calgary's hood, seeing the SWAT team regularly thinking I was in a cool movie, living with a drug-addicted step-parent, and much more. Nonetheless, even with those life experiences behind me, I was not ready for the backlash against my identity. I've always been one of the kids to get along with various groups of kids, but my main group was always the outcasts who had already been labeled in our neighborhood as goners. Being in this group at specifically a Catholic school meant we had a lot of LGBTQ+ kids in our group, so it was a safe place. However, I didn't see anything wrong with me or my identity as we grew and romance started popping up everywhere. I loudly and proudly let people know that my love has no boundaries. While my group was supportive of this, there were a lot of kids at the school who weren't. This was when life started to completely just fall down. I began to receive death threats both on and off social media and in person at school. I would show up to open my locker to notes of how I was a sin and should never have been born and so forth. I would be given papers with instructions on how to tie a noose. I would sometimes even find makeshift nooses in my locker or backpack. It even got to the point where I would get physically assaulted when I was on my way home. My favorite thing to do was spit on me. As a result of the bullying and other life events, I developed severe mental health complications. With these developments, I was in and out of hospitals and all kinds of programs across Calgary for both mental health and addiction. I missed all of my junior high education from grade 7 to 9, and by the age of 14, had 13 suicide attempts behind me, with a few actually being really close to taking my life. During these years, at the age of 12, is when I came out about not identifying as my birth gender identity. At first, I'd only known the transgender umbrella to hold two identities under it, female to male and male to female. So when initially coming out, I came out as female to male. I changed my name right away, and the lush locks you see today were chopped off. My mom and I searched for resources for youth my age to get help transitioning, and found out there was only a wait list, which were up to 4 years, or age limitations. I didn't get into a transition program until I was about 15. I found coming out really freeing, for now I could live a more masculine lifestyle without the comments, because now people just thought something else was completely wrong with me. However, living my entire life as a female presenting person, I had no idea what I was doing, so I looked to the community for advice. At this time, the LGBTQ plus population was small in Calgary compared to now, and the community was drastically different. Everyone seemed to have an opinion on what I should be wearing, styling my hair, acting, and so forth. I felt like I'd left one dimension of being shackled to another. I did end up cutting ties with all LGBTQ plus associations I was at the time, in order to be free of what felt like never-ending opinions and judgment. After being able to breathe for a moment, I did more research and found that non-binary fit my identity better. I neither wanted to be known as woman or man, but rather just Seb. I also decided that I only get to have a say in how I present, just like everyone else gets a say in how they present. It's been a long process, but I've made it so far to the age of 17, and I've been living my true identity for 5 going on 6 years. I still face discrimination to this day for both my sexual identity and gender identity. I also still find myself wary of any community, for I find that no matter which one you're a part of, there's toxicity that's never acknowledged or undermined, and personally I'd rather not deal with it. However, I will say the trans community has increasingly got much better in Calgary compared to 6 years ago, especially with accepting people who identify under the label transgender as other than female to male or male to female. I'm so appreciative that youth like me and just people like me have days to acknowledge us. I'm also appreciative of the creators of this event for choosing and allowing me time and a voice to speak about my experiences as a trans youth in Calgary. Thank you for your time and listening. That's it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. Beautiful story, and it just speaks to the pain that trans people have to go through on an everyday basis. And if we lived in a perfect world, we could just be who we are, and we wouldn't have to answer to people that don't understand that. Okay, whew. So our next presenters are Yulia, Solditova, and Destiny. Yulia's pronouns are she and her. Destiny's pronouns are also she and her. Yulia is a visitor to Treaty 7, as her ancestral lands are from Russia. She identifies as a trans woman. In her spare time, she enjoys learning languages, art history, reading, making videos, and painting. Destiny is a visitor to Treaty 7 as well. Her ancestral lands are from Treaty 8, as she is Dene. She identifies as a trans woman as well. In her spare time, she enjoys playing video games, airsoft, YouTube, streaming and editing, and drones. Please help me to welcome Destiny and Yulia.
Is it on? Hello everyone, all 20-something people who are watching. I want to talk about LGBTQ plus community in Russia. I was born and grew up in Moscow, so I know better than everyone else. And let's start. So legally, the human rights are guaranteed by Russian law. Legally, there is no persecution of queer people, but in the constitution that was changed recently, the marriage is defined as a union between man and woman, and same-sex couples are not legally recognized, even though trans people have the opportunity to go through the transition process with doctors, counselors, and all that stuff, so trans people are recognized. How ugly. Gay propaganda law. So this beautiful lady is very passionate about traditional values and keeping them. And she wrote a bill that bans promotion of homosexual relationships among minors, so whoever is younger than 18 years old. And this law is not really like super active as a law. It was passed, and only 14 people were fined in the course of 2 years after this law was introduced. And it works more of a social pressure thingy. And people can justify their homophobia and other awful things by this law. And it works like a social censorship and justification of violence. Why do I keep pressing the same thing? Oh, you don't have any of animation. That's very bad. So she, this lady, Mizulina, her last name, last year she introduced a new bill that would basically make lots of problems for trans people, problems with birth certificates. Trans people wouldn't be able to change their birth certificate, but they'd be able to change their passports, which would create sort of, what do you call it? Very unstable and risky situation. And with that, it would be prohibited for any trans person who changed their documents to marry anyone else, if it's a heterosexual relationship or homosexual relationship, because they would have different gender marks in different documents. It'd be very confusing. But this law, this bill, as you can see, was rejected because my animation doesn't work here. That's Putin, and a few years ago, he was giving a speech at Osaka summit. Let me quote. They've thought up 6 or 5 genders, transformers, I don't even understand what it is myself, Putin. The president of Russia shows very little interest or understanding in LGBTQ questions. So that can be seen as a general tendency for Russian politics. Can't say anything about Chechnya. I haven't been there, luckily. But Chechnya is a region of Russia that is located in south. It's heavily religious Muslim region, and the independent British investigators found out the evidence of torture and lots of bad things going in there. They have like concentration camps for queer people where they torture them for queer people to give information about other queer people. And in the interview with the Canadian journalist, Kadyrov, the president of that region, said that we don't have any homosexuals here. If you find any homosexuals, they can go to Canada, take them. And many refugees from Russia are actually from Chechnya. LGBTQ refugees that are coming to Canada. And very, very, very bad there. Not a good destination. Social violence. In 2010, 4% of Russian residents said that in a what was that? No quiz. In census, they said that LGBT people have to be destroyed. In 2010, it was quite bad with social justice. This guy in the picture was making YouTube videos. He's a neo-Nazi, and he started as like a blogger who would text other people on the internet, pretending to be a very young boy or a girl to set up a meeting, and then this is how he debunked pedophiles. But then he switched to just gay people, gay men, and he was put in prison actually, and he recently committed suicide in there. And yeah, let's not talk about him much. The latest statistics is very promising. So 47% of Russians believe that LGBT people should enjoy the same rights as everyone else. And as you see on the graph, it goes up. And according to my recent knowledge, there is not much of statistics, but the general mood and opinions on LGBT people are getting more and more in that neutral zone. That's very nice. Go back. Activism. Activism is very big in Moscow and St. Petersburg. There are many different independent artists who make flash mobs, they organize events, demonstrations. There are a few certain days when it's sort of allowed. It's not really supported by government, but well, what can we do? We just go on streets, do something, connect to each other, have that sense of community, yell at police, and it feels very nice. Yeah, so these are the pictures from this protest. They're big, and they are observed by police, sometimes stopped, but they are still a thing. So queer people, Russia is a very big country that is rich for talented, fantastic, amazing people. And there are some few historical figures who are definitely queer. We know about them a lot. Tchaikovsky, a famous Russian composer, gay. Eisenstein, the director who made so many things. He was filming black and white movies. He did fantastic job on cinematography, and Hollywood, all the Hollywood movies are based on his experience, expertise, and research. Nijinsky, a famous ballet dancer who immigrated to France. His jump with freeze in the air was fantastic. There are even videos on YouTube. And Tsvetaeva, a famous Russian poet whose deep psychological poems are just very nice. Go back. The current queer culture is big, very big. There are many YouTube bloggers and celebrities that are queer, and they're celebrated, they are respected, and they have, oh, it doesn't play, my very nice, it does play. This is the most famous Russian drag queen who is beloved by all the population, even the older generation. Very fantastic, very nice. Trans people, gay people, lesbians everywhere. We have everything, and we're not going to shut up about it. How do I got that next? I need technical support. What does it say? Play. Play.
Oh, play.
That one. No, that one. Play. Play.
That throws us in full screen. Okay.
Okay. How do I go? I broke the computer, but the conclusion that I want to draw is that stereotypes are bad. That, oh, being gay in Russia, being queer in Russia is so bad. It's not that bad. And I want to finish and wrap it up with a poem by, can I have a slide? I want a slide. There is a translation of a poem, how people will understand. We're back. Умом Россию не понять, аршином общим не измерить. У ней особенная блядь. В Россию можно только верить. And I want to wrap it up on this. All the Russian people, all the Russian queer people, my friends that I know are tremendous people. They're strong and brave. And instead of being like me and moving somewhere else, being a visitor to Treaty 7, they chose very difficult but very challenging, demanding, but at the end of the day, rewarding way of life, queer life in Russia. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Megan. I use she, her, and they, them pronouns. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the initiatives that Trellis is doing to support queer and trans youth in the city. So Trellis has one of the only queer housing programs in Alberta. This program is called Aura, and the Aura program is a harm reduction scattered site housing first program for 10 youth ages 14 to 24 that works alongside LGBTQ 2S+, gender non-binary and gender non-conforming youth who are at risk of or are currently experiencing homelessness. Aura helps youth find appropriate housing where their gender identity and their sexual orientation is respected and celebrated. The Aura youth receive the necessary supports, resources, and services to develop life skills, build natural supports, grow towards physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health and well-being, all while working towards adulthood and self-sufficiency and independence. So all of this to say, Aura is a program that helps young queer people find housing in the city, especially when they're experiencing homelessness. A lot of times their queerness compounds into them experiencing homelessness. Yes, and that is a little bit about one of the initiatives that Trellis is taking to help support young queer people.
Hi, everybody. My name is Justin, and I use he, him pronouns, and I am the marketing coordinator here at Trellis. I am honored to have a few minutes to speak about a very special person who's touched a lot of lives here at Trellis. Florence, or Flo as most of us knew her by, was a client in many programs over the years at Trellis. I'm going to read a piece from Flo's old YTA worker, Talia Calvert, who could not be here today. It's been 6 months since Flo passed away, and there isn't a day that I don't think of her. She's one of those clients that stays with you after you close their file. She probably stays with all of us. I know I'm not the only one who feels this way. She just had that personality. The same word comes to all of our minds when we think of Flo: firecracker. She was feisty. She was a fierce advocate for herself and those who she loved. She wouldn't put up with anyone misgendering her or anyone else, and she knew how to speak her opinion. It takes years for a lot of people to be able to do this. Flo fought her way through the many obstacles life dealt her. Flo had the sweetest, most generous heart. She always made sure to let people know that she cared about them and she valued them. She gave to them out of the little that she had. She could make someone belly laugh with her wit and sass. She was hilarious. Yellow was her favorite color, which was fitting, bold, bright, and made a statement. I'll forever think of her when I see a piece of fabulous yellow clothing. Thank you, Talia, for those heartfelt words. Today we remember all the trans people who lost their lives and remember all the trans people who are still here with us today. My pledge is to continue learning and educating myself and others and supporting trans folks any way I can. I'll end this with a quote. Sometimes the biggest, brightest, shiniest stars burn out the fastest, but the light they gave will never be unseen. Now is the time for us all to demand more so more stars don't lose their light. And on that note, anyone watching today can always donate to our Aura program to support young LGBTQ 2S+ youth. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, and prayers to Flo.
Okay. Well, I don't know about you folks, but I feel like my heart is definitely very big and warm today hearing all of the previous speakers. So I just also want to take a moment to say thank you to everybody who has taken time and energy to come speak with us here today. My name is Blake. I actually work here at Trellis Society. I am a local queer, non-binary, trans, queer, Métis maker here in Mohkinstsis. And today I am speaking about my experience. I also want to preface this by saying that this is my experience. I don't feel as though I'm trying to speak for all of trans folks or all of non-binary folks or, you know, any of my fellow indigiqueer folks out there. It's been a challenge. So today I want to speak a little bit about what it's been like existing outside of the binary. As we had Seb mention earlier, it's a lot of that binary thinking that comes to mind when people consider trans folks. And so for myself, I come from a very small town, about 10 hours north of here. And for myself growing up, it was not the most welcoming, not the most open. It was a very dangerous and scary environment to be in for anybody who wasn't cis, white, straight. And so in comes a pesky queer, trans, non-binary, Indigenous folk like myself, and I just didn't really have a place to fit in. And so my journey didn't really begin until I moved to Mohkinstsis here in 2013. Yeah, it's been a challenge. I'll say that to begin with. So existing outside of the binary, people will place a hard binary on most things in life. But when it comes to gender, the binary is everywhere. It's been very challenging for myself, and I'm sure many other folks, but no matter where you look, you're just being faced with people reinforcing the binary. And so for myself, when it comes to being a non-binary person, and then when you exist in that world, and you constantly have a world around you saying that you don't belong, and there isn't a place for you, and you're either this or that, and if not, then sorry. And so it's been a very challenging, but being able to do more learning and have a better vocabulary and be able to have the language that we do now has been an incredible privilege. I can't even imagine what it would have been like when I still lived up north. I didn't even know what a non-binary person is, or, you know, even trans folks. Like the mass miseducation is just a lot to blame, I feel like, a lot of the time, but it's chaotic, it's everywhere. You either are being met with people don't understand what you are, and a lot of the time that miseducation and that misunderstanding leads to aggression and violence, and which brings us here to today. So I want everybody here today in participation, viewers, everybody alike, to take today as a moment of learning and growing, but also look beyond it, because as trans folks, it's pretty challenging to have two recognized holidays, both of which being one saying, please acknowledge us, Trans Day of Visibility, and our other, tomorrow, Trans Day of Remembrance. And so it's either, please acknowledge that I exist, or please acknowledge those we've lost. And a lot of the time, those we've lost have come from not being able to acknowledge that we exist. And so today, while it is time to honor those we've lost and be able to share the stories of pain and grief, it's an open invitation to keep the learning and the growing, because we all need to look at ourselves. Because once you think you learn everything, once you think you know everything, then that's when it gets a little bit dangerous. So, coming to the conclusion of being non-binary for myself was very confusing for a long time, because as I grew up as a young pesky queer, it was always, you know, the language of like, oh, like tomboy or anything like that. And beyond that, there's no further consideration, or there's no place to go when you feel that discomfort in yourself, when you look at the world and the world is telling you that you're one thing and you're feeling like that's not correct. You know, that's not fitting for me. I feel out of place. I feel like an alien. And so feeling all of those feelings for most of my life, and then moving to McKinstis back in 2013 and going to art school and being in that space where like everybody and their dog is queer, which is amazing. But it's a way more opening space to be able to look at yourself and try and figure that out. And so that's when my journey began, was once I moved here and was able to see like, oh yes, queerness is a thing, but also as soon as you get over, you know, like I feel like step one is like your sexual orientation, and then you're like, what? And you begin to figure that out. And then after that happens, then you're like, wait, gender enters the chat? You're like, oh my God, I don't know anything. But that's why today and this education is very important, because while these are our experiences, there are so many folks out there who are feeling a lot of complicated feelings and are forced to be in environments that are telling you to fit into one of two boxes. And it's not safe. It's not the reality. It's a lot of strength to be able to open your mind and be able to consider more. And so, while it has been very challenging for myself to come to where I am now, of feeling open and comfortable as being a non-binary person, as being an Indigenous person, as being a queer person, that I am very, very few humans feel comfortable. And so this is an open invitation, as I previously mentioned, for everybody listening. Do better. You know, that's all that we can do, is better. And what does that mean? That means so many things. That can mean like doing a Google, getting some understanding, use today, use this weekend, to do some trans research. Go online, figure out what the heck this means, because once you start doing that, you'll see that, yes, there are many stories who align with ours, but there's not a lot of resources out there because a lot of people don't want to have these conversations. Because if you've made it up until this point, I'm sure you've been a little uncomfortable at some point because there's violence everywhere. But the only way that we can get out of that is with taking the folks who have the privilege and being able to use their platform and their voice to be able to help their trans communities around them. Because while we are still fighting like hell, we're never going to give up. Let me just say that. Like, the fight never ends and we're not giving up. But do your part, Do better. Do some research. See how you can support your queer community. See how you can support your trans folks around you. Because while you might think that this doesn't affect you, it absolutely does. I want this just to be, a call to action. Do some research. Get a little more educated, Because the more you better yourself, the more that we can all better our communities around us. And maybe we can start focusing on the folks who are here currently. Because while, yes, we have lost so many folks. And like, as Ezra was reading at the beginning and speaking about the stats and saying that there's no violence in Canada, like, if that made you feel better, I just want you to know that like that's not the reality. While numbers not being reported may seem like there is not a problem, there's so many lives who go unreported, who go unlisted, who people don't give a second thought about. And so while numbers may say one thing and you may have that as any kind of reinforcing for ideals, there's so many folks out there who are hurting and need support. And while here at Trellis, like obviously we're trying to do as much as we can to support our communities, it's not going to happen until we all make it our own prerogative. And so I mostly just wanted to speak today about being non-binary is hard. Yes. Being trans is hard. But our world around us can get better and it can get brighter, but it just requires everybody doing their part. And doing your part means like literally doing anything. Please, literally do anything. But I want the rest of today and this weekend to be a time of a bit of reflection and reprieve, because I feel like even as I was driving here today, there was something on the radio that it's just violence about queer communities. Because a lot of the time, we don't have a lot of representation in anything, but the small representation that we normally have is the realities of the harm. And the harm is real and it hurts. But also, like, how can we support trans folks around us? How can we uplift those voices of success and be able to make sure that people aren't another statistic? You can do your part, so please do better. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Blake. That was amazing. I'm just incredibly grateful to be around so many like-minded folks. I just want to thank Blake and Justin, Shannon, Sean, Destiny, Raven, Sebastian, Alyssa, Megan, Yulia, Destiny, I think I said everyone's name. It's a lot of names to remember. I just wanted to open the space for any of our viewers that might have questions. If you just want to put it into the chat, we'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Sometimes creating inclusivity with trans or queer people is just like using your pronouns so that we're not making assumptions. Gender neutral washrooms are a huge thing. I would like to see more of that so that I don't have to be afraid when I go into a women's washroom, because being non-binary, I'm not comfortable going into a men's washroom. And I'm also not comfortable when women, or presumably women, are looking at me shocked, thinking I'm in the wrong washroom. That's like an everyday existence, unfortunately, and it gets to the point where, as a person, I want to avoid using public washrooms so that I am not feeling unsafe. And I'm sure the same goes for other people. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, we are here to answer them. And I see a lot of people are commenting on Blake. Yeah, Blake is amazing. And you can tell they have their own podcast. I'm a bit of an introvert myself, so me having to talk about anything to a public audience is always nerve-wracking. And like even today, because Trans Day of Remembrance is not just about me, I'm an older queer trans person. I walk with privilege. So really today I wanted to amplify our young two-spirit queer trans youth, and I hope that we were able to do that. I guess we'll just give it another minute, and then if nobody has questions, I guess we can give everybody the gift of time. Oh, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Oh, yeah. I'm pretty sure they're okay to drop the podcast name. Yeah, I can just. Blake is actually beside me.
I'm just teching the whole thing, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have a radio program, but also you can podcast it. It's called Them Fatale, like Femme Fatale, but non-binary. Which you can find on cjsw.com. Go to programming, Them Fatale. Got all of that. But yeah, all about spreading representation because the world's a lot better when you see yourself in it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's so many shining lights today, and it's nice that this is our third time doing it, and I'm just so grateful for all the help that I received today as a person, as a Trellis employee. I hope everybody enjoyed, learned, got woke, whatever it is that you need to do.
Yeah, do some research,
Yeah, if you don't know, all you have to do is ask.
And also we have a ton of resources in the the description as well for social resources if you need.
Yep. And like Blake said, we can always do more. We always need more resources. We definitely need more queer resources. Lots of queer folk that are not in positions of power really struggle with basic needs, staying housed. There's a lot of violence that is happening on an everyday basis, and we need to start to mitigate that and mitigate, not medicate. It almost sound like I said medicate. But sometimes it has to start from the top down to create those changes.
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Okay.
you, Kat Dishman. That's my sister from Ontario.
Yes, thank you for everybody who popped their head in, popped your ear in, whatever you did, and attending today. This has been very important and also very vulnerable for all of our speakers today. So I do want to say, of course, thank you again so much to everybody for taking the time to speak with us today and speak with you lovely folks. And hey, we're not going anywhere.
Yeah, and I just want to let everybody know, because sometimes you don't know what's happening behind the scenes, but like after today's broadcast, we're going to meet with everybody, all the young people, do a debrief to make sure that everybody's needs are being met and that we aren't leaving with any upset feelings, or making sure that we're all supported. So that's also an important piece.
We have
of
one
why we
question
do.
here.
Yeah.
You say, hi, is your Aura program usually full?
Yeah. Hey, Linda. That's usually through the Calgary Foundation. So Aura is one of our Housing First programs, and usually they have to go through the source and identify as a queer person, and then they just kind of go into the queue. And lastly, I just want to say, like, as a circle keeper, I actually provide Indigenous supports to our Housing First young people. So that's Home Fire, Aura, Infinity, Unity, and then our YTA programs. So that, because that's connecting to Indigenous culture is just as important as connecting to basic needs. So it's great that we can do that.
We have a question from Margot that says, how do youth get into Aura?
Yeah, so that's through the source. I don't know the number off by hand, but usually they have to go through the source, through the Calgary Foundation, and then it just goes into the queue with all of our Housing First programs.
Yeah, if you go to our website, growwithtrellis.ca, we have a ton of information all about our programs and anything under the sun. And if you don't find it on there, just bug us. Just send us a message and be like, hey, I'm confused. And I'll be like, same. And then, you know.
We only have 34 programs.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. Like, it was great to be able to do this today and provide you with some key information. And I hope you all have takeaways and yeah. Do you want to say anything? The mastermind?
Just that my big takeaway from things like today and just any kind of like queer public facing event is to try and look beyond it and try and go beyond it. And while we do have a few days that are designated to these issues, you know, it's an everyday issue for any trans, gender diverse, queer folk here in Mohkinstsis. It's not something that we can turn off. It's not something that we can, you know, it follows us everywhere. It follows us into work. It follows us into our leisure life. It follows us into everything, you know. Being a queer person, like the hypervigilance, the fear, the everything, it doesn't end. But it can get a little better if we all try and do better. And so I feel like that is mostly my takeaway for everyone listening, is that let's go beyond the days. Let's go beyond the like performative, put up the post, do the thing, say the bit, and integrate it into your life, because there's queer people all around you.
Mm-hmm.
We're everywhere.
Well, and just to answer your question, Linda, Aura is always full. So usually if queer identified people have gone through Aura, any other queer people, if our spaces are full, they have to go into our other Housing First programs.
Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.